So for tonight, we're going to focus on bass and trout fishing in Massachusetts, but this pertains pretty much to anywhere in the world that you're fishing for bass or trout, particularly here in the Northeast. There's so many similarities, whether you're in Maine, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, or Massachusetts. We're so lucky here in New England to have so much water at our disposal, not just fresh water, but salt water as well. So if you're at all interested in fishing, definitely dig in and check it out, because we are, I mean, you could be living in the Southwest where you have to drive 100 miles just to get to a trickle of water or a pond or lake. And here you could ride a bike 5 minutes in any direction and or walk and find good water to fish. So I want to start with a quick visit to our website for some great information on fish and fishing. And sometimes I stick this in the middle or at the end, and I end up with not enough time. So I thought I'd just do this right away for you. So we'll stop this share, and then we'll bring up our website. And I just want to focus on a couple of things, in particular, as it concerns locating fishing spots, and bass and trout fishing. So let's scroll down, and you'll get the link to our website. Not that it's rocket science. It's just Google Mass Wildlife, and it'll be the first one that shows up. The most important one is the Go Fish Mass map. That is by far the most important resource on our website for fishing. It's just loaded with wonderful locations and places to go. I mean, I'm just going to show you a couple of quick examples of that. I can get to there we go. Just zoom in and zoom out. So all these little purple dots, folks, these are places to go fishing, whether they're rivers, lakes, ponds, reservoirs, and then the information that goes with it. So if you just kind of, so I live right in this little town. I probably live, there's Beaver Lake and the Quab, and I probably live right over here somewhere. I'm going to go up and look at Hardwick Pond, because it's a good example of a small pond that everyone has in their town. And it's just a great resource. I mean, so Hardwick Pond's a 10-minute ride up the road for me, and the next town up, Hardwick. And general information about the pond, recreational access, fish populations, and fishing. And then if you scroll down, we have bathymetric maps, and bathymetry and bathymetric maps are just underwater contour lines. So it shows you the depth within the water columns, within the pond or lake, if you're fishing pond and lakes. So it's kind of reverse of if you've ever looked at a geology map with the topographic features, elevation going up, it's just below sea level, below the water level anyway. So in this pond, you have 5, 10 feet, 15-foot contours. So that's your deeper water. And why are those important? Well, it's important to know seasonally when you're fishing. So if you're fishing for trout this time of year, you'll want to be and they're in Hardwick Pond. It's a stock trout water. You'll want to be down in the deeper water here. So it's good to be able to ID that. Now you can use this on your device when you're actually out fishing. You can just punch in these maps, and it'll show you exactly where you are on the pond. So there's no guesswork. You know you're over 15 or you're 17 feet of water, and then you can jig down, and we'll talk about those techniques in a bit, and find the trout if you're fishing for trout, or go into the shallow water and look for the bass. This time of year, though, in the heat of the summer, especially days like today, the bass are probably going to be down with the trout in that deeper water. Trout are cold water fish, and we'll get into that a little more. And bass, the two species of bass we have here in Massachusetts, largemouth and smallmouth bass, are kind of warm water and cool water fish. So when that temperatures get into the 80s, the water temps into the 80s, they tend to even go down in the deeper water and get back into the 60s and 70s down with the trout a lot of times. So that's why these maps are so important, and it's great to know where the fish are, where your water depths are, and correspondingly where the fish are going to be. Now we'll talk more about structure and locating fish in ponds in a little bit, but I just want to show you that, just a quick little example of that. So that's our goldfish map. That's right in the fishing section, and it's a whole tour. There's hundreds of water bodies to check out. Pond maps you can print off. Some of the bathymetry is brand new. We're always updating that and doing a whole bunch of ponds every year. Some of it's a little older, but it still has it's the black and white version of what you just saw. It's just not as clean looking. Now, there's also our trout stock report. So if you click on that, and if you're big into trout fishing, you'll see all these are locations we stock trout in. So you can scroll into it like I did with the other map, or you can just go down and punch in either the water body or the town you live in, and it'll show where we stock and the date we stocked and the species that we put into that water body. So again, we stock, I'll talk about our trout stocking program, but we stock mostly spring for a few months and fall for 2 to 4 weeks in the fall, depending on water temperatures and location. So spring and fall. So that's when this is going to be updated. Literally the day after, or the day of, or the day after we stock, you can find areas where we put trout. And we stock about 500,000 trout in the spring and about 50 to 75,000 in the fall. So this is a great resource. We'll back this up a little bit, and then we'll show you. You can go in for best bets. So this is trophy fishing, kind of sort of just where a lot of our best bets for bass, for trout, and for other species of fish consistently come from every year. We're always adding to these pages. So it's based on a lot about our Sport Fish Awards program. So if you're that's a program that you can get, little awards for catching certain size fish and trophies and that kind of thing for catching bigger and bigger fish of that same species. And it's all the different species. It's a whole entire program, but we take a lot of the data from that and put it into these best bets, so you can find consistently where you're going to catch more bass and or more trout. So just great resources. There's way more here, but I really want to get back into the meat of the presentation here tonight. So I'll go back in and pull up the PowerPoint. But definitely stop into our website and do a tour and get familiar with it, especially this page right here, the Go Fish Mass Map, and we are always adding to it. So let's see if this can click for me. Oh, it's always a little slow. Okay, so we'll start with bass. This was cheating. This was a couple of years ago. Me out on Browning Pond in Central Mass in Spencer, probably 10 years ago now. So this was two beautiful largemouth bass we electrofished out of just a downed tree, and we'll talk about structure and cover in a minute. But we just pulled right up, hit the electricity, and boom, these two huge bass came up, 5-6 pound bass. But those are in there in a ton of water bodies throughout the state available to catch, particularly during this time of year. So the two main species of bass we have, there is another, lesser known species, and I'll talk about that. But the two main species of freshwater bass in Massachusetts and really throughout North America are the smallmouth bass that you see here and the largemouth bass. These are in the sunfish family of fishes, so they're related to bluegill, pumpkin seed, green sunfish, the smaller sunfishes, and they're the largest two of that family. With the largemouth bass having the potential to get the largest of the two. The smallmouth bass is more or less a cool water fish than a warm water fish. In other words, it is a little bit different habitat and a little cooler water than the largemouth that loves shallower, warmer systems and is more prevalent in those systems and down through the south. Whereas smallmouth bass are more of a northern tier, northern New England and out in the upper Midwest and across the kind of the Canadian American border areas where the water's a little cooler. You have deeper lakes, but they interface. A lot of them live in the same water body. They just will look for different habitats within those water bodies, and they have the potential to get very large. Our state record smallmouth is 8 pounds. Little over 8 pounds, and a state record largemouth is a little over 15 pounds, so almost twice the size. So again, the largemouth has the potential to get bigger, but in Massachusetts, it's not uncommon to see 5, 6, 7 pound smallmouth or largemouth, and they look very similar. So let's take a quick look at the differences. So largemouth are a little, in terms of body shape, they're going to be pretty much the same. So quick visual, they're not going to look much different. However, the coloration, they're a little blacker. They're both grouped together called as black bass. They call them black bass, both small and largemouth, but the largemouth are truly darker on top, lighter on the bottom. They have this kind of a vertical patchy bar-like feature here, whereas the smallmouth are more of a brownish bronzy color and have these kind of subtle vertical markings. Depending on where they are in the water body, these are very subtle and sometimes can't be that well defined. So that's why we really go more with the traditional How do you tell the difference? It's the size of the mouth. The largemouth has the bigger mouth than the smallmouth, and it's when the jaw is closed, like in these great artist renderings. So in the largemouth, with the upper and lower jaw snapped together, their mouth is closed. The rear of the upper jaw is beyond the eye. It's well beyond the eye. In the smallmouth, the upper jaw with the mouth closed is about midpoint of the eye. And now with the mouths open, it's very clear. The largemouth is very, very large. Smallmouth is still decent size, but not nearly the size. So you'd have to almost have them side by side. Other markings, they have the elongated dorsal fin, but on the smallmouth, sometimes it's a little more separated than the largemouth. There, in terms of regulations, we lump them together. You can, if you were keeping fish, they're 5 fish a day, and they have to be at least 12 inches. I would just caution you that if you're keeping bass, it's probably better to eat the smaller ones that are between 12 and 15 inches. These are wild fish, and wild fish are exposed to atmospheric mercury in Massachusetts and throughout New England. So if you're older like me, it probably doesn't matter a lot. But if you're developing and younger, you probably want to, well, particularly if you're 12 and under, you're a woman of childbearing age, or you're pregnant, you probably don't even want to eat these fish because of the potential for mercury. But if you're older, out of that developing demographic, you're a teenager, you're 20s, 30s, or older like me, eat the smaller one. So a 12 to 15 inch bass would be 4 years or so old, 3 to 4, 5 years old at most. So haven't had the ability to bioaccumulate as much mercury. But if you're starting to eat the 4 or 5 pounders that could be 12 to 15 years old, you're not going to taste it or anything. And the meat's tasty, it's delicious. Some people love to eat bass, but I would just caution you that, throughout all of New England, it's an advisory. And that's how they define it, kind of, sort of. So if you want more information on that, Department of Public Health's website is lengthy information on fish advisory lists. So by the season, folks, whoops, I skipped that. So by the season, here's what you're going to look for: where to start bass fishing by the season. We'll start in the spring because that's when fishing is at its peak. We're sick of the winter, we're sick of the cold, and we want to get out and get outside. And fishing is wonderful for all species in the spring, especially mid to late spring. So once the ice is thawed out, these fish start to really become active. They're both either between cool and warm water fish. They don't do that well under the ice. And I'll talk about that as we're going through the year here. So once the ice is thawed out, the active fish, the larger fish, the ones that are going to be laying their eggs soon, will get into those shallows where the heat of the day and the sun is going to warm that water up quick, and they're really going to start eating. So focus on shallow water areas in like late April through May, and they spawn in late May, early June, depending on the water temps. Summer morning before sunrise and just a little after till 8 or 9 is best, because the water temp is probably this time of year, July and August, it's at its peak. It's probably in southern New England here, it's in the upper 70s, low to mid 80s, depending on the depth of the pond and the lake. So I'd focus on early and late in the day. If you're going to fish middle of the day, go deeper because they're going to get down and they're going to be in the deeper water. Food and cover, and we'll talk about the difference between structure and cover in a moment. The cover is abundant in the middle of the summer. So focus on the cover areas, and the food will be there, and the bass will be cruising in those areas. And in the main lake area, the deeper part, if you're not catching them if you're in the middle of the day, you're not catching them always start on the shoreline and work your way out. And if you have a canoe or kayak at your disposal, a boat, that kind of thing, then get out in the deeper water and give that a try. And we'll talk about vertical versus horizontal fishing. You're getting toward the late summer and fall, then it's more, you got to let the heat of the day, the warmth of the day, heat that water up. So that's why late afternoon, early evening is best. The water's the warmest. And then again, in the more shallower waters, they're coming out of the deeper waters. They're starting to focus on putting up the food stores for the winter. They're eating a lot in the fall. So later in the afternoon, evening, and in the shallow areas, focus on. Winter is a tough time for bass. Bass, like all fish, are cold water. We're not going to get into the physiology of fish. We talked about that a little in the basics, but they're cold-blooded, so that means that they don't have an internal regulatory mechanism that allows them to adjust their body temperature. So they're at the whim of whatever the water temperature is. So certain species thrive in the colder water and certain thrive in the warmer water and certain thrive in between. So I just say that smallmouth, largemouth bass really thrive when the water temps are in the upper 60s through the 70s and low 80s, depending on the species. So in the winter, the water temps are not that. They're even in the mildest winter under the ice, the water temps are going to be mid to upper 30s. So the fish, the bass are going to be, they're going to move less, they're going to feed less. Sometimes smallmouth bass will group up sometimes by the hundreds in one little area and just kind of hold on and wait until the winter goes by. They'll be in the deeper water because deeper water in the winter is warmer. It's a weird paradox. Water is its most dense at 34 degrees. So that water, the water on the surface near the ice is right at freezing or thereabouts, and the water on the bottom is 34, 35 degrees. And while it doesn't seem like much, it's nuanced. The bass know it, and they'll be pretty much right on the bottom or just off the bottom, trying to exist through the winter. And if you're going to fish for them in the winter, it's fun. I love ice fishing. We even teach ice fishing programs. You'll want to use smaller baits because they're not that hungry. They're not looking for a huge meal, and you want to fish it slowly because they're not moving around a lot. You can YouTube some bass through the ice videos, and it's so cool. And you'll wonder why you're not catching fish through the ice. And you'll see some of these videos where the fish will just come right up to the worm or the fish you're putting in the water, your lure, and they'll just look at it and they'll swim away. They're just like, they'll slowly swim up to it and say, nah. So they're just kind of hanging out, waiting for warmer times. And obviously that's here in New England. If you fish the winter time in the South, that kind of mimics maybe our fall or spring where there's no ice. So you can have a lot of action, but you can have a lot of action sometimes through the ice, but generally it's for species like pickerel and yellow perch and the more active fish through the winter, trout even. But bass are a little harder to come by in the winter. And when you find them, sometimes you can find a lot because they hang out together, particularly smallmouth. So bass live at a variety of depths depending on the time of the year. Water temperature dictates their metabolism, like I say, because they're cold-blooded. So we kind of hit on that already. Weather conditions are huge. So, well, a general adage is on those hot, sticky, warm days like today, they're under low pressure. They're a little more active, and under high pressure, like when that front that's promised to come through on Saturday and dry us out, we feel better. We feel more invigorated, but the fish kind of a lot of times will shut down following a heavy front like that coming through. So that's that barometric pressure thing, shifting weather conditions. So there's a lot of science on that. That would be a 2-hour talk all by itself. So just research that a little bit in terms of tactics for that type of those weather conditions. And again, it's speeding things up, slowing things down. So when you get the cold Canadian high pressure coming through in the summer, you'll want to slow down your presentations. The bass aren't as active. And in the warmer, muggier days, it's a matter of finding the right water temperature, and they're moving around, they're feeding a lot. So you can fish a little more actively and a little quicker. Watercolor is huge. We are going to get into that in a bit and with a slide and talk a little more in depth about watercolor, because that dictates color of lure, how deep these fish are, and sometimes how active. So structure versus cover. A lot of times these are so confused, and I even get confused myself. So just to quote a famous bass angler, Bill Dance, structure is the shape of the bottom or the irregular shapes and contours of the bottom. And I'll show you this with a slide in a second. So be it a river, a creek bed, a point, or a big, huge hump that comes up into a lake, and in the cover is what's on it. So the logs, the trees, all that kind of thing. So he puts it simply: structure is the cake and cover is the icing. And it's good to know the differences, because if you're reading about it, if you're really getting into bass fishing or trout fishing or any type of fish, the pros will use this terminology, and you'll get it confused. Like, structure, aren't they talking about like trees and weeds and everything? No, that's cover. Structure is the actual shape of the water body, where they live, where they make their home. So it's like, structure would be like our house, the house that we live in, whether it's upstairs or downstairs, and cover would be like the furniture that we sit in, or the stove that we're cooking on, and like the habitat within our structure. So that it's nuanced, and sometimes it's interchangeable, but just know that if you're reading about it, just know the difference in those two terms, especially if it's someone reputable, they're going to differentiate. So structure here is a little snapshot. This is Lake Anota, but I just clipped most of it. This shows it really well. So structure would be like these points. This is a little island. This is an inlet, a cove. This is a big point sticking out. This is deep water. So these are areas of structure. This is the house of the fish. That's that terminology. Cover is like the vegetation, the overhanging trees, the bushes, the logs, the trees that are falling into the water, the aquatic plants, the rocks, boulders, boat docks, and ramps. That's all your cover, and fish seek out that cover within their house, within that structure. So finding bass, that's not particularly difficult. I would say if you're a beginner and you've caught a handful of sunfish, bass are in the sunfish family, maybe lucked out and caught some bass just by throwing worms off the shore, that's wonderful. And generally what happens is people now want to graduate and focus on a species, whether it's a trout or a bass. They want to focus more on a particular fish because it's all about the tug of the line for most people, or bringing something home to dinner. And if you're just catching these little pumpkin seed, sunfish, perch, that kind of thing, it's entertaining, but then it's like frustrating because now you're trying to catch bigger fish or a fish you want to eat. So you want to focus, not just throwing in any old place. You want to focus in structure, on cover areas. So this is a great area right here. We're just going to give you a little kind of quick tutorial of this lake. This is a man-made reservoir, I'd say. So this is the big earthen dam, and all the boulders below affords a tremendous amount of cover. So you wouldn't just come over here and pitch your lure here or your bait here or here. You'd want to be defined. You want to be on the dam, down in the rocks, down where the fish are, especially in the middle of summer. Or, you want to be in that cover of that fallen tree, sunken trees, that kind of thing. You'll want to be on the point right there. Fish stack up on the point and down off the point in deeper water. In the weeds right here, particularly early and late in the day in the summer, they're going to be up in the weeds feeding. Submerged stumps, all in this area. That might be a beaver back up to a pond where it's flooded and killed all the trees, and these stumps are awesome because they have holes and all kinds of hiding places. Can be tough to fish because you might get all tangled up in here, especially if you're fishing the bottom, and we'll talk about bottom versus top water fishing. But it's awesome because the fish will get into these cover areas and lay in wait for prey to come by. The lake basin margin, again, the bottom of the lake, especially in the winter, if you're ice fishing, or the middle of the summer, if it's really hot, they'll be down there. They'll be really right on the bottom. So if you can reach it from shore or in a boat, it's a wonderful, that's considered cover for them. They'll get down in the bottom and hang out in here. Stair steps along drop-offs like this, where the water gradually gets deeper and deeper. They'll hang out in there. They're looking for certain water temperatures with that certain oxygen temperatures. And depending on the time of the year. So if you're not catching anything immediately off the shore, and if you have a map, the resource on our website of the water body, you can find these deeper areas in these structure areas. And of course, flooded timber, like this area, is awesome. It affords all kinds of cover. So there's so much more to it, but that's a quick snapshot of a relatively common little drinking water supply pond or lake with some of these features that you'll want to look for. Don't just pull up and go off to the beach and pitch around the beach edges and where there's no cover. There's really doesn't afford much for fish at all. Those wouldn't be the best areas to find bass. So watercolor fishing tips for bass. Clear water, a lot of those Cape ponds, southeast ponds that have sandy bottoms and they're deep, they're very clear. Also like the Wachusett Reservoir, Quabbin Reservoir, Central Mass, huge systems that are wonderful to fish and very productive. Tremendous visibility. Fish can see as well as we can in their environment. So you'd want to use a light colored bait like white, light chartreuse, tans, those very light colored baits in clear water. Use a line that's not going to show up a lot. So fluorocarbon disappears in the water. So even if you just put a 4 or 5 foot leader on your main line of fluorocarbon, or like a light colored line or a light green line that would if the water's a little green tinted, it would go kind of invisible and the fish don't see it as well. If the line stands out in that clear water, you're not going to fool them. Also the baits, if you're throwing like dark baits in that light water, sometimes that just bugs them. So again, they have great visibility, 20, 30, 40 feet. They can look up and see you in the boat, see you on the shore, hear you as well. So think about that. Stained water, and a lot of New England ponds are stained with tannic acid from the oaks. in particular. The leaves and the hanging over that tannin and tannic acid will get into the water and give it little tea color. Also, the siltiness on the bottom and the leaves and all the benthic material that lays on the bottom will stain it and will give it a kind of a darker or like a black tea look. And that's just a look. That doesn't mean the water's at all dirty or really stained. If you were to take a clear glass and take a scoop of it, it would look like clean water. So it's kind of reflection off the bottom in that tannic acid. But that does affect the visibility. So 1 to 3 feet ish for the fish in that range, and more of a brownish or a shad colored bait would work better. And these are not hardcore tried and true. If these colors aren't working, go flip the switch and go the other way. But these are definitely some old tried and true methods based on water color and clarity. And then muddy water. There's a lot of ponds and lakes that are really muddy, shallow, silty systems. So fish shallow, visibility is only 1 to 2 feet. Use bright baits, like a bright fluorescent bait or bright reds or pinks, something that really pops in tight to get the fish's attention. So watercolor can play a critical role as water temperature and depth. So if you just come to the water body, you'll want to start, especially in the summer, you want to start with top water or horizontal. So think of just vertical down through the water column or horizontal presentations. You'd always want to start horizontal in the morning, right when you get there, especially if you're getting there early. Nothing like top water fishing. Nothing. Seeing that fish come up and just slam your bait is such a blast. And then if the top waters aren't working, you can try spinner baits. And I'll show you those different lures in a bit. Crankbaits, rattle traps, jerk baits, they call them, or stick baits. Something that gets the fish's attention, but still is moved horizontally through the water column within a foot to 3 or 4 or 5 feet of the upper part of the water column, but still moving horizontally through the water column. And then if you're not catching a lot at one speed, you vary your speed. You go slower, you go a little bit faster, and that can make all the difference in the world, especially if it has little rattles and vibrations to it to draw the fish in. If they're not really hungry, you might want to slow it down. If you're going slow and it's not working, just speed it up, reel it in super fast. So you'd be surprised how just little subtle changes like that can affect your ability to catch fish. If that isn't working, go in the deeper water. If you can get to the deeper water, even from shore, sometimes you can find the deeper water by casting out and then start fishing toward the bottom. And your vertical presentations with jigs, weighted jigs, or just lures that get down deep. Texas rigging, Carolina rigging. That's just a way to rig lures that get down deep. Texas, and we just don't have time to get into all the rigging. Suffice it to say that Texas rig basically is just a weight that slides up and down your line, attached to the nose of your bait, and your bait is kind of put on your soft plastic bait or a jig, or like one of these jigs right here. Is just put on. You can put it weedless, so if there's rocks on the bottom or weeds, and that weight will slide up and down. So you cast it out, and then the worm or your jig can slide up and down and within the water column. Where a Carolina rig, that weight is fixed, and then you put a leader on it, so you got 3 or 4 or 5 feet depending on how much you want on the end. So they're nuanced. They're a way to fish down on the bottom. And another nuance is drop shot rig. So if you really have to fish that in a boat, canoe or kayak, fish it straight down vertically off the bottom. The weight is on the bottom. Your bait is up 2 or 3 feet off the bottom, suspended. Look those up. They're all excellent tactics to get fishing down deep using. I'll show you some of the lures that you'll use. And tube baits, those are they're just hollow in the middle. They look like salamanders or crayfish, and those can work really well affixed to some of these rigs, and of course jigs. So those are just ways to get down deep if nothing is working on the top 1 to 5 or 6 feet of the water column. Lakes and ponds versus rivers and streams for bass. A couple of nuances. You're really going to use the same lures. They eat the same things, but there is some differences. Some people love rivers. They call them river rats. They feel more comfortable in rivers. And we're talking big rivers: Connecticut River, Merrimack River, Concord River, that size river, all the way down to a little bit smaller rivers. The smaller streams and creeks, you're not really going to find bass in. They have to be at least medium size. I'd say like a Concord River, Assabet River, Deerfield River, Swift River out my way, Westfield River. Those are going to hold bass. And then, of course, Connecticut and Merrimack, they're much bigger rivers, and down into the southeast. Um, um, those rivers too will hold bass. So there are some nuances. In lakes, water temperature plays the most critical role in finding bass. Again, during the spring and fall in the shallows, um, fish in the shallows as bass will focus here as to forage as the water warms up. During the heat of the summer, it's best early and late in the day to go in the shallows, but middle of the day, go down deep. In rivers, it's all about the current. So now these fish are, they're not, it's not a big deal for them, but they're expending a lot more energy fighting that current. So they're eating a lot more, particularly through the warmer months. So you got to find the bait. They will hold to cover a little bit more, but then they'll move off of it to grab bait. So bait is found, and these are bait fish generally. They're gonna be found in flat areas or up tight to the bank or in the undercut bank or areas where the fast water changes to the slower water. They call them seams. Find these areas, and again, there's tons and tons of information on YouTube's and websites to be found where to find bait in rivers. Find the bait, you'll find the bass. But keep in mind that current really affects their feeding patterns because they expend so much more energy fighting the current. Smallmouth bass can tolerate faster current. Largemouth bass like slower current. So backwaters, oxbows of rivers they're just slow moving. They don't like the fast current, whereas smallmouth, some people refer to them as almost like trout because they can handle cooler water and they like the faster moving currents. But other than that, similar lures are going to work, similar baits. Bass are opportunistic feeders, not that picky if the right lure or bait comes in front of them. So it's nuanced. There's not a ton of difference between, it's just kind of your preference, whether you like rivers or still more of a still water environment, lakes and ponds and reservoirs. Best lures to use? Well, this is a tough one. This confused looking guy here, a lot of people have that look when they go into the store because lures are sold as much to the angler, to the person that's fishing it, as they are to the fish. The fishing industry doesn't care if the fish like them. They just know that they want them sold. So do some research. I'm going to show you some good ones, but go do some, if you're fishing for smallmouth bass, Google the top 10 smallmouth bass, the hottest top 10 smallmouth bass lures. It does change. Some will work for eons, decades, and some will get tired and not work that well. And then the newfangled ones that come on the market for a year, 5 years will work really well for a while. So do some work. Don't just go into the sporting goods store, look up at the wall and go, that looks great, that looks great. Because yeah, they look great to you, but they don't always work for the fish. So here's some favorites, some tried and true ones. These are categories. So within those categories, you still have to pick and choose because there's thousands of lures. You have to pick and choose the color patterns and the ones that work really good. Spinner baits and buzz baits work good at finding fish. They rip through the water really fast. They make a big vibration. So early in the day, they're great to locate fish in those horizontal patterns. Top water, again, are fantastic. If I could just fish one kind of lure all the time, it would be these top water lures. But the fish are only feeding on the surface for a small amount of time. It's just the most fun kind of fishing. Stick baits, long skinny baits that only usually go a foot to 2 or 3 feet down in the water column are great for those long casts, horizontal presentations. Crankbaits usually go 5 to 10 feet down, so they'll kind of be up, and then as soon as you start reeling them, they'll crank down to the 5, 10, 15 foot level. So you can use them as horizontal / vertical presentations. And some that work really good are these crayfish imitators, because they look like a crayfish moving through the water. And then the soft plastics, probably everyone's favorite category that really is a hardened bass angler, because there's so many different varieties and they have the texture, the taste, the smell of a live bait. And a couple of my favorites are the Yamamoto Senkos and all of those knockoffs, the ones that imitate those. They're salt impregnated. They are plastic though, which is the drawback to them. If they get into the water, they can, because they're salt impregnated, they kind of blow up and they get really big, and they can do that in the fish's stomach. So they're great at catching. They really tell you where the fish are. If the fish are anywhere near there, they're going to grab it and go. They look like a worm. If you fish them in certain ways, they can look like a crayfish, or even a small bait fish if you hook them up Texas rig. And then there's other ones that like this looks like a little fish. This looks like I don't even know. This looks like a salamander. This looks like a little kind of a little, it's just a twin-tailed grub, like a little insect in the water with a tail, curly tail. This is another salamander. But these are the long, skinny ones that look like real worms, work really, really good at finding fish. So again, within each category, find the best ones that work just by doing a quick Google search. You'll get the top 3 or 4. Load your tackle box with those in the right colors, and you'll have a lot more success. So live baits, for those that really want to catch and eat the fish, this is the way to go. Fish like something live. You'll catch more fish with live bait. You can catch and release too, but they generally really swallow it, really attack it, hit it hard. So the best 3, I think, well, there's best 4. I just didn't have a picture of the other one, and I didn't want to plagiarize off the internet. So these are our own pictures. Shiners, and these are golden shiners. Most pond shiners that you're going to buy in a bait and tackle store are golden shiners, and you can trap them for yourself too. Every angler is allowed 1 bait trap, and you can just put them in a pond or a river, bait them with a little bread or dog or cat food, come back every day and check, and you'd be surprised how many little shiners you can catch, and use them. Keep them in an aerated 5-gallon bucket and go out and fish for them. It's very popular in ice fishing, but even this time of year, it's popular, especially bigger fish, like a bigger meal. It's all about energy in, energy out. So whether it's bass or trout, they're going to be looking for something bigger. That's why these are popular options. Big old night crawlers, crayfish work really good, and shiners. Shiners just the category of minnows, but mostly it's golden shiners if you're buying them in a bait shop. Just know that you have only a certain few that you can use, and that's on our. You're going to get the link to our fishing laws as well. So just make sure you're using the right ones. And the 4th one is hellgrammites or dobson fly larvae. They're big, wormy-looking things you can find in rivers. You can buy them in bait shops too. They work really well for small and largemouth bass. They're very big, like 2 and 3 inch long. They look pretty nasty. They have a lot of little feelers, and they turn into these huge dobson flies. People think, oh my God, they're mosquitoes, like even bigger than crane flies, but they're harmless. But their larvae are huge, and smallmouth bass in particular absolutely love them. Shoreline versus boat fishing for bass, purely a matter of preference. I would say if you don't have a boat, find a friend that has a boat. If you want to get a boat or kayak or canoe, start with a kayak or canoe. There's so many cheap options out there. Don't run out and buy a boat right away, because the boat actually stands for break out another $1,000. Between the boat and the trailer, every year you spend more money on it and working on it than you actually do fishing. And I'm no different. I have a nice little boat, but I spend as much time working on it as I do fishing on it. So if you can get a kayak or canoe, very inexpensive. If you really want to get out in the water, but a pair of waders, hip boots will get you right out into the water, and you can catch just as many fish. This fella here is one of our best volunteer instructors, and he's a shoreline specialist, and he absolutely catches a ton of these guys, largemouth bass, just working the shoreline. A neat little paradox when you're out there fishing, you'll see everyone on the shore trying to cast way out, and you'll see all the people in watercraft casting right into the shore. So that sweet spot right near the shore is all you need. So you don't need a watercraft. It helps you a little bit. It is peaceful to get out on the water column, but it costs money. And if you're just new to it and you're not sure, don't run out and buy it. Find someone that has a boat. All right. So I've talked a lot, too much about bass. I got to get into trout here. Trout are wonderful. They're our safest eating option, folks. They're just a delicious fish. We have rainbow brown and brookies. The brookies are the prettiest ones in my mind. Our native trout, brown trout, are originally from Germany, Europe. They've moved them all over the world, and rainbow trout originally from California out west, and they've moved them again all over the world. We also have landlocked salmon and lake trout here, landlocked salmon in our Quabbin Reservoir and Wachusett Reservoir systems, just in those systems though. Trout in Massachusetts, cold water fish. Why are they a cold water fish? Cold water holds more oxygen. Trout need more oxygen to survive. So they're looking for that colder water or fast moving water. Important sport and food fish, second only, most important food fish for freshwater fish in Mass. In terms of popularity, I think largemouth still ranks a little bit above trout. They're a family of fishes with soft rays, large mouths, adipose fins, and teeth, whereas the bass have very fine teeth. 3 groups here in Massachusetts. So the Pacific trout and salmon are represented by the rainbow trout. The Atlantic trout and salmon are represented by landlocked salmon and brown trout. And then the chars are represented by lake trout and brook trout. Those are actually chars, but they're all in the salmonid family. Where do trout live? In cold, clean water in diverse habitats. They like it messy, so they don't like beaches, dams, sterile channels that have been carved by humans for flood control, that kind of thing. Erosion. They love dirty, messy, curvy streams with all kinds of stuff growing right into the shore and stuff down into the water. So they like a natural system. They eat aquatic insects, all manner of aquatic insects. They really focus on those more than anything, but also worms, things that fall into the water out of the trees, crustaceans like crayfish and other smaller fish. Stock trout, which again, we stock over 500,000 a year. You'll want to think pellets because they're fed in the hatcheries, pelletized forms of those are fish proteins that are put into little pellets and fed to them on a daily basis. So for the first few weeks to a month, they will naturalize, and they're born with everything they need to figure out how to survive in the wild, even after they're raised to size in a year to a year and a half in a hatchery system. But within the first few months, the smaller pelletized baits like the fish eggs, the small pieces of worm will work better initially, but then once they're kind of naturalized, once they're more wild, they're looking for what they're going to find in the water column is worms, mealworms, fish, crayfish, tons of aquatic insects, whether that's mayflies, stoneflies, dragonflies, midges, and all those other families they're hatching in good, healthy systems. Live bait rig for surface fishing is a simple bobber rig with a weight and a worm on it. Don't complicate it. Spring and fall, especially in our stock trout waters, will catch you a lot of trout. I prefer these kind of bobbers because they're skinny and they have the weight already attached, and the fish don't feel them as much when they're biting. But very simple setup. Smaller hooks, you'll want to get down into the 10, 12, 14-inch hooks. And if you're catch and releasing, just clip the barbs down on them. If you're catch and keeping, that's a moot point. Live bait rigs for bottom fishing, and this pertains to bass too. So this is your typical drop shot rig. You're going to have the weight on the bottom here and a little hook a couple feet up off that rig. And this is your standing line going back to your rod and reel. And then you put a worm on this, or a pellet, or a shiner, that kind of thing. And it suspends in the current, whether it's in a lake or pond or river, and it just sways back and forth, and it's a great draw. It's called the drop shot. Then a three-way rig, again, the line going up to your reel, a little three-way swivel, and a weight on this side. And it's very similar to a drop shot rig. It just allows a lot more line out and a lot more natural presentation, especially in a where there isn't a lot of water current. It can just get up and float in that current. And then a sliding rig where it's fished right off the bottom, and this can slide up with your bait into the current. And this very simple system is kind of like a Texas rig or a Carolina rig. And these can be used for bass or trout. You're going to get this presentation, so you'll be able to see these, and then you can Google search some for more specific setups and videos of people setting them up. So those are 3 tried and true bottom rigs for trout, but you can use them for bass too. Popular trout lures. So you want to focus on spoons and spinners, mostly if you're spin fishing. These can work too, soft plastics and stick baits. If you're fly fishing and or using flies, trolling, or on your spinning rigs, streamers, you can't go wrong. Trolling streamers, and trolling is just a technique where you're putting a lot of line out behind your watercraft and slowly moving through the water. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then, of course, dry flies, wet flies. There's hundreds and even thousands of fly patterns. But if you're fly fishing, you know this, or you want to fly fish. But you can even fly fish without a fly rod. You can use a spinning rod and use flies, whether you're using a little weight and attach it to the end, or a bobber, attach the fly, and that can work just as well. So you don't have to just use flies for fly fishing. But if you're really trying to catch fish, I would focus on the spoons. They're called spoons because they're big pieces of metal, kind of in the shape of spoons, or spinners. Not spinner baits, just spinners. There's some beads here that give it a vibration, a little sound actually, and the spinner itself, the blade, gives it a vibration. Various colors, sizes. Again, do a Google search of the most popular spinners currently for trout, and you'll find 4 or 5 that work really well. Same thing with spoons, because there's hundreds of these different iterations. Stick baits work really good for trout, as do some soft plastics, but I would focus more on spoons and spinners and flies. Trout in rivers and streams. So trout hold more to cover. They're easier to find in rivers, but rivers, if you're not familiar with them, you have to deal with the currents, walking out into the current, finding fish in those currents. It's not always so easy. But here's some areas where you can. So in these deep bends, trout love to stack up in the bends, in the undercurrent bank, in the deeper water. Behind wing dams, which are man-made structures to slow down other stream currents coming in for erosion, they'll hang out right in back of here. Behind natural points in rivers, they're called eddies. They'll hang out in here where there's differences in water. You'll have current ripping by here, slower current here, and then it's churning in here. They like to hang right out in that. Why? Because it's not so fast, it's not so slow. Remember that the fast water, they're going to have to use a lot more energy to stay in, so they can sit here in let me get my cursor. They can sit in this kind of medium water where there's some decent oxygen, not in the super slow water here where there's less oxygen. And then they can dart out into the current where they're going to find food traveling. So they can be right in here. They're called eddies. Riffles right here below these below these structures hold more oxygen. They're shallower water, but fish hold right into them, especially when the water's really warm. They're looking for more oxygen, so that faster water, these riffle areas can work good. And riprap, which is just boulders and big rocks in the water column, they'll hang out in those structured areas too. So again, this is just a cursory look at a river. And feeder streams too, where the feeder streams come in and the water's churning up. A lot of times they'll hold right in there. So again, sometimes it's nuanced. They're harder to find. These areas can be harder to find given the river, but once you find them, the trout usually hold to these areas better. They're not swimming around as much. They stake out their claim, hang right in there, and you can find them day after day sometimes in the same area. You can catch them, release them, and then go back a couple days later, catch them again. So rivers can be easier in that regard. Lakes, trout in lakes and ponds and reservoirs, they're always kind of moving to their preference. So like in the summer, they're going to be down in the deeper water this time of year in the 20 to 25 feet because they're looking for that colder water. That colder water is going to hold more oxygen. When early in the day or late in the day, when they're starting to get hungry, they'll go to the channel areas, whether it's an outlet or an inlet, and that's where the food is going to be. And the water's cooling down. The sun is on the horizon. It's not really focused as much, so the water's starting to slowly cool down. They'll be in these areas. And they'll be in an understructure as well, particularly spring and fall when the water throughout the water body is a lot cooler and it's not stratified as much. So stratification is just the thermal patterns or the water temperature patterns within the lake once the summer sets up or the winter sets up. So when it's not so much set up, spring and fall, they could be anywhere in the lake, but they're going to be in structure. They're going to be within the structure of the lake. They're going to be where the cover is, hiding, waiting for bait fish, or actively seeking bait fish. So they'll be moving around a lot more. Where in rivers, they're holding within the structure of the river, they're holding into certain covers a lot more consistently. Shore fishing for trout. Set up and wait in lakes and ponds. Use a shore fishing bite alert setup I've shown right here. It's hard to see, folks. Believe me, it's a rod and reel here. Instead of putting the bobber in the water, you're attaching the bobber. You can see the line right here. You're attaching the bobber after the first big guide. You're just attaching it and allowing it to the line to run freely through that bobber. So don't click the bobber down to where it's pinching the line. Just kind of move that little clip that you'll see on the bobber so the line can flow freely up through the guides, down into the water column with your bait on it. Now you can just sit and chill out. And this is going to alert you. Now, when the fish bites, you'll see this jumping up and down. This will be moving up. So you don't have to fish the surface with a bobber. You can be fishing in deeper water using this setup. You'll see this. You'll see a lot of hardcore trout anglers fishing from shore using this setup. So once this jumps and your line is running freely through this, you can just reel the fish right in. The bobber will just hold right to this guide or slip back to this guide while you're fishing it. Use 2 rods. You're allowed to use 2 rods in open water. Use 2, one with a bait setup like this, or even just with a bobber setup if it's spring or fall or early in the morning or late in the evening in the summer. And then the other rod, use your lures. Work the shore near your bait, your live bait setup, and just use lures. Slow and steady fishing slow and steady in moving water. You know, I mean, if it's still water, sometimes it's best to just, you know, vary your retrieve. And that's just going to come with practice. Fish early in the late in the day. Keep the sun in your face. Don't keep it at your back. If you're casting a big shadow, whether it's in a river or a lake, the fish will see it. And if trout are a little harder to catch sometimes, they're a little more weary, especially in rivers. They pick up your vibrations. They're a lot warier about shadows cast into the water because they consider it a predator, and they'll hide and they won't even bite. So again, approach with the sun in your face, not at your back, and hip boots and waders so you can wade in a little bit. It gives you a little more distance and your ability to get into the water. Trolling for trout or fishing in a boat is a wonderful technique. If you have access to a canoe or kayak or a boat or a buddy with one, trolling is probably one of the best techniques for trout. Then you can you just put your rod in the water, take 100 feet, 200 feet of line, let that out behind you, and either paddle really slow or have the motor, whether it's a trolling motor or a gas motor, just going 1 or 2 miles an hour, and just putt through the water column with your bait out behind you. And that bait can be any lure, whether it's a spoon, spinner, stick bait, live bait, a shiner, that kind of thing. Use a fish finder to locate where the fish are in the water column. If you're going to commit to a boat, get a fish finder. They're not that expensive anymore. You can get a decent one for under $100. Find where the fish are and fish through the fish. Fish in multiple depths. In the summer, they're going to be down deep. Spring and fall, right after ice out, right before ice in, they're going to be right up shallow in the surface. Find the right lure. You know how to do that now. You got to do your research. And just keep changing lures until you find the right one while you're out there. Vary your depths throughout the day. In the morning, even in the summer, they're going to be up higher in the water column, be right up within the first 5 or 10 feet. As the sunlight comes up higher, they're going down deeper. And that's not even about water temperature. They just don't like that direct sunlight. They're going down 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, even more in the bigger, deeper lakes. Get up early in the summer and early fall. Get up at 4 in the morning. Get on the water in the dark. You'll catch more fish. Using lead core is an easy way to get down deep. It's just line that you can buy in the store, put on your reel, dedicate one reel to lead core, and it has lead impregnated into the line, perfectly safe to use. The line will protect it, and it just gets that line down deep quickly. And or use a downrigger. It's a wonderful technique. This is a little more value add extra for those that do boat fish and haven't gotten into downrigger fishing. Not rocket science. It's just a device. Here's our happy angler in the boat. It's a device attached to the stern of the boat, the back of the boat, with a big ball on it, and you attach your line to it, and it allows you to get down deep quickly to where the fish are. Sometimes the fish are 50 to 100 feet down, and this could be in the Massachusetts water, but a lot of the big lakes up north and out west are going to be hundreds of feet deep. Sometimes the fish are 50, 100, 150 feet down, especially once the sun is up, they go down deep. And you can see the big schools on your fish finder. Hard to get at them without a downrigger. Downriggers can be expensive, but you can get cheapo ones you can just clamp on that work really good with this. It's a big old lead ball that you attach your line to, and you put the rod in the holder right on the downrigger, and the line goes all the way down. You clip it, and you have your lure out above beyond it, and then you just slowly troll a mile or 2 an hour down where the fish are, and you catch more fish. So it's a nice technique that catches you more fish in the deeper water, particularly in the summer. So not something you absolutely have to get into, but if you get into boat fishing, it's a nice tool in the arsenal. So the last couple of tips here for fall fishing, because we're coming into the fall. I know, I shouldn't even say it. It's still the summer, right? But we do have a month or so to go. In the fall, wear blaze orange if you're fishing in and around prime hunting areas so hunters can see you, like if you're in those little streams out in the woods. Look for deep pools, tributaries, and thermal springs where you're going to get different water temps. Fish over spawning areas. Most of the trout that are in our waters, brook trout, rainbow trout, and brown trout, spawn in the fall. There are spring spawning rainbows we stock, but a lot of them do spawn in the fall. Use egg baits. And most of the time when they're spawning, they're just pissed off. They're not really looking to eat. They're just something flashes in front of them. They're trying to spawn. They'll just bite it out of anger. But fish over those areas, you can catch a lot of fish. Use egg baits. something that looks like the eggs that they're laying. Beyond the water early, as water temps are still pretty warm in the early fall, look for feeding areas. Again, where the bait fish are. Windswept shorelines are good on lakes and ponds. Overhanging trees, streams, and rivers entering lakes. And spoons and spinners, I think, work best in those long stick baits I showed you. So yeah, we're coming into the fall here within a month or so, and we stock a bunch more trout in the fall. And those trout are delicious to eat. I'm sorry I went a couple minutes over, Laura. I jammed it all in, and I had to speed up my trout talk a little bit, and I focused a little more on bass. So I apologize to the trout centric folks.
That's all right. So much fantastic information. I feel like I'm ready to go on a fish scavenger hunt, although I'm not quite ready to commit to a 4 a.m. wake up time. I have to.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. And we probably should have made this a 90-minute. You know, I could have expounded a little more, but always happy to come back and we can focus more on just a presentation on trout where I can delve in a little deeper or more on bass. But it's all in there. I'm going to send you the PDF of the PowerPoint so everyone can use. And this is meant as a jumping off point for folks that want to fish for these species. Use it as a cursory start, and use the internet and your buddies and your more advanced anglers to get you even more information. I mean, it's just a starting point for folks that want to focus on those fish.